Okay, well, it's 6 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us this evening. JOMA is a nonprofit organization of female Jewish physicians and trainees who are passionate about community health outreach, engagement, and advocacy. Tonight's webinar is hosted by JOMA's Women's Health Committee, and one of our missions is to support the next generation of trainees through mentorship opportunities. And so tonight is specifically designed for medical students considering a career in OBGYN. We are thrilled to have a panel of recently matched and current residents here to answer some of the common questions that future OBGYN applicants may have. And I would first like to extend a giant mazal tov to our recently matched OBGYN applicants, as well as an enormous thank you to our current OBGYN residents who are volunteering their time while on nights and vacation to be here today. Before we dive in, let's take 5 minutes while some of our attendees are logging on to introduce ourselves. I will start. I am Dr. Anna Weinstein. I completed my OBGYN residency at Hackensack University Medical Center, and I am currently a first-year Maternal Fetal Medicine Fellow at Montefiore Medical Center. Outside of work, I am a mom to 4 wonderful children, aged 4 months to 10 years old. I started medical school with 1, and I graduated with 3, and I recently had my 4th through IVF. I'm a passionate mentor for OBGYN trainees, and I am super excited to be moderating tonight's event.
I can go next. I'm Nicole Feigenblum. I'm a second-year OBGYN resident at Hackensack. Went to Hackensack also for medical school. I was on nights, but my lovely Tova over there is covering nights for me so I can be at a conference. I'm currently in Orlando. I gave a presentation today. I don't know what else to say, but I'm excited to be here.
I can go next. Hi, everybody. I'm Sara. I'm a current PGY2 at Rutgers, Barnabas. I went to Weinstein for medical school. I'm a mom of 2. I had both kids in medical school. I think that's about it.
Hi everyone, I'm Tova. I'm also a PGY2 at Hackensack. I will be driving to work during the middle of the session, but I'll stay on my phone. I went to Weinstein with Sara for med school, and I'm with Nicole during residency. I think that I'm interested in REI as a fellowship. I worked as an IVF coordinator before med school, so it's very special to me. And no kids. I will pass it on to Ayelet.
Hi, I'm Ayelet, or Alexandra, as I'm more commonly known in medical field. I went to Stern for undergrad, and now I'm graduating from Einstein this year. I recently matched at North Shore LIJ for OBGYN. I'm really excited. And I didn't come to medical school thinking I wanted to do OBGYN, but I kind of found along the way, and I'm really happy to have matched. I'm happy to talk about that if anyone's interested. And I'm going to pass it off to Alyse.
I think Alyse might be hopping on a little bit later, so we're going to pass it on to Asnat.
Hello, everybody. My name is Asnat. It's a pleasure to speak to everyone. I am a 4th-year medical student at NICOM, and I just matched into Hackensack, so I'm very excited. I'm going to be working with Nicole until I always knew I was interested in OBGYN, and now it's really exciting that I finally matched into the specialty of my choice, and I can't wait to talk a little bit more about that.
I think I'm the last, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Zahava. I'm a 4th-year med student at Mount Sinai, and just matched. I'll be joining Anna, Dr. Weinstein at Montefiore this summer. And outside of medicine, I have 2 daughters who are 5 and 2.5. So I had them at one a little bit before starting med school and one during. And yeah, I'm excited to be here and talk to her.
Amazing. Okay, so without further ado, our first batch of questions are geared toward the recently matched OBGYN applicants. So let's talk about away rotations, or AIs, as many of our applicants are getting ready to impress coveted programs this summer. For those of you who did aways, what advice would you give? Zahava, why don't you start?
Yeah, so I'm trying to put myself back into the space of like applying for the away application, although maybe we're past that point actually in the cycle, so maybe it's more helpful for I think I sort of like applied relatively selectively to programs that I like were in cities that I knew both I was like interested in possibly spending 4 years for residency, and also were like feasible for me to spend a month there given the fact that I have a family. So like it was pretty limited in terms of like where I applied. And I was given the advice, and this probably varies by med school and by advisor, but the advice I was given was that that there is risk to doing an acting internship, and that it's not necessarily helpful. It's really helpful for you as an applicant to get an inside glimpse at a place if you're sort of uncertain about it or making a decision about it. And so I was really excited. The only acting internship rotation I did was at Weinstein, actually, and I think it really solidified my decision to I ended up deciding to rank it number one, and it was a really eye-opening experience for me. I think I wasn't sure what it was going to be like going into it. And so from that perspective, I think it was great. I definitely would say I'm someone who knew I didn't want to stay at my home institution. And so I think my attitude was, I think the advice that I don't know if I was given this advice or if I just felt like it was important, but I really tried to be very present in my away rotation, to really treat, expect of myself and sort of treat everyone else as if I was there. I was an intern. Not that you should ever do this, but I was never trying to leave early or always just really trying to be very present and get any experience I could get. I think that was kind of the biggest sort of difference in my attitude while I was there. I felt very kind of locked in and just really trying to absorb any kind of experience I could get. Yeah, I spoke a lot. I don't remember if I had anything else to say, but I'll pass it on to someone else.
I could pick up a little where Zava left off. I do agree with Zava that if you're not going to put your best foot forward at an AI, it's better not to even do it. For me, I went and did 5 away rotations, and I applied via VSLO. And as many of you know, of the panelists, you get what you get. And I had a lot of MFM rotations, even though I was just not at the currently moment interested in MFM, but it was a way to get your foot in the door, and it was the way to be at the hospital. And that was the most important thing for me. AI is technically an interview for a month. The nurses get to know you. The residents get to know you, the program director, the attendings, the fellows, everyone gets to know you and see how you're doing. So if you're not going to be at your best, it's better to think twice before doing it. I had a wonderful opportunity to see multiple hospitals, how they run, how the system works. So what Zahava was saying before, I got to see how different hospitals work and how different programs worked. And that was really eye-opening for me, because you could be like, oh, I don't want that, or I don't like the way this is run. So I think it's important to keep your options open. I applied to as many that I could physically be at. So, and in the nicest way, you should very politely be emailing the residency coordinators or whoever is responsible for that rotation to be like, hi, I'm really interested in your program. I really want to do this, because they get a lot of applicants and they don't really look through the list sometimes. My recommendation is, if you really want to be at a program, try your best to email the coordinator and try to get in. And once you're there, act your best, perform to the best of your ability, and if they like what they see, they will hopefully interview for residents.
And a follow-up question to that, Asnat. So you're graduating from NYITCom. What advice do you have specifically for DO applicants on the call?
You're going to hear a lot of things wherever you go about, oh, what type of school you go to. It really matters what type of student you are. If you put in 100%, people will see that you're interested in the field. It doesn't matter what school you go to. And I really think that we're put in sort of a disadvantage, because a lot of the times we don't have the research abilities that other schools have, or my school doesn't have a home institution. So I think it just sort of pushes us to strive to be better and to work hard. And I think that at the end of the day, the program directors see you and they see you as an applicant, and they know that you're not what your 2 initials at the end of your name are. So I would recommend just try the best that you can, be a good student, be a good applicant, try to do best by your patients, and they will see that.
I love that. I agree.
Thing about as a resident seeing AIs rotate. I'm just gonna pick on Asnat because she did wonderfully when she was at Hackensack. I was on nights, and I think what she did is she knew it was feasible for her as a student when coming in. She made sure that she had the ability to get to the hospital on time, to be able to pre-round and ask the night team, which was myself and 2 other individuals, what happened overnight, what updates can I get? And I think that was the biggest thing, that she truly cared about the patients on her MFM list. And that really like spoke volumes for our team when we have like other people that just come in for our sign out, barely listen, don't see the patients during the day. It's a very different experience. So do what you can to make yourself fully like part of the team, not just kind of like there as a student that happens to have a little bit more experience.
I couldn't agree more with everything that has been said. Kind of transitioning a little bit towards cultural identity. Did any of you mention being Jewish on your application, whether it be a mention of your participation in JOMA or in any work, volunteer experiences, research in Israel? And if so, were you asked about it during interviews? Ayelet, we can start with you.
Yeah, so it was pretty obvious from my application that I was Jewish and Orthodox Jewish, having attended Yeshiva University and also having featured JALMA pretty heavily in my application. I was involved in a lot of different JALMA things over the course of 4 years, and I really wanted to talk about them. So I was very rarely specifically asked about my Judaism. There were a couple of scenarios that I did come up though. I brought up being Orthodox in scenarios where I thought it might help explain my interest in a certain program. So for example, if I interviewed at a hospital that mentions that they have a large Orthodox Jewish population in like near Lakewood or in Brooklyn, I mentioned that I'd be honored to take care of patients and members of that community and bring my perspective patient care, because I thought it helped explain why I was interested in that hospital and might probably made a stronger case for my presence there. And I thought it might be an asset. Additionally, I would be asked like kind of indirectly about it because on my application, I wrote that I got an associate's in religious studies from Stern, which people were like, "Oh, what's that about?" I'm like, "Oh, well, that's kind of a requirement as a dual curriculum," and I explained that, and that kind of helped. That was another way that people asked. I think maybe I was asked like twice or three times about that. But whenever I did mention that at Orthodox, I like always, even though I felt comfortable doing it, I always like immediately put in some sort of line about like, well, but of course I'm happy, like, I'm okay with the schedule and I would never, ask for any accommodations or anything like that, just because like I do understand that like there might be some sort of stigma that like, if you're Orthodox and you're looking for special accommodations for scheduling and Shabbos and Yom Tov, and like, of course, like when I'm in the residency, I'm going to do my best to, maximize my Jewish identity and, get off of the Yom Tov when I can. But I didn't want to like put that out there in my initial interview. That was kind of the advice that I was given. And, you don't want to start asking for days off in your interview. So that's kind of the take that I took. There was only a couple of other scenarios that I brought up. If I knew, for example, that the interviewer was Jewish, I felt comfortable bringing that up. There was one program director who interviewed me and we had a really engaging conversation about what it's like to have like a Jewish identity in the hospital after the October 7th. And that was probably one of my favorite interviews because it was like a really honest and like conversation, because she asked about my identity and I felt like this was a safe space where I could talk about like how being Jewish affects me in the hospital. But that's kind of my like how I approached it, that it's a strong part of my identity, but I'm also not looking for any accommodations for it. And I think, yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead if you had.
That's it. I was just going to pass it over to Zahava.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I think I did try a little bit to limit, like, I didn't specifically mention JOMA now that I think about it, but I also hadn't been very involved in JOMA, so it wasn't something I was like actively trying to avoid mentioning. And it definitely came up again, like on my application, like I spent a summer writing for the Times of Israel, and I I think the way I portrayed it in my application, I was hoping it would be kind of like a selling point and a point of interest, because it was sort of like I was interviewing like both Israeli and Palestinian artists, and like so I sort of framed it as more of like a point of like cultural diversity, I guess, in that aspect. I will say like that specific experience I think was only brought up by like one interviewer who was clearly like Orthodox and was wearing a kippah, and he was really interested in that. I don't think anyone else specifically asked me anything. I did have this one weird interview where I believe it was the program director who was, I don't believe she was Jewish. She was like, she had grown up, I went to Princeton for undergrad, and she had grown up in that town. And so she like had a lot of questions for me about campus life. And she started asking me about like the Center for Jewish Life there, which I think maybe was like very, very briefly mentioned somewhere on my application, but was not a major feature. And she kind of used that to like start talking about the Jewish communities in the area. And I was like a little bit uncomfortable just because she didn't identify herself as Jewish. I didn't think she was Jewish. And so I didn't like know. It's sort of like it made it a little bit odd, but I don't think I sort of revealed my level of observance. So like I don't think in that instance, like I felt like I needed to sort of do what you were saying, Ayelet, like you're sort of covering like, don't worry, I'll work on Shabbos, that kind of thing. Should I get into the Shabbos interview stuff or do we want that to be a separate?
Yes, get into the Shabbos interview stuff.
Okay, I knew that was kind of like a separate questions. I do want to talk about one of my interviews was at like a program I was really, really excited to get an interview for, had all of their interviews scheduled on Saturdays. There was like several series of unfortunate events surrounding this interview. Basically, I initially emailed them and asked, and I will just like as a caveat, I didn't get quite as many interviews as I was hoping to get. So I was lucky and I got enough and I felt okay, but I didn't feel like I had like so many that I could sacrifice an interview. Like I wasn't at all in that range. And it was like by far like the most sort of like elite program that I had been offered an interview for. And so I was like it felt like potentially like career ruining to not this interview. And I debated a little bit whether I should ask them about an accommodation, but I decided that I had to at least ask if they would be able to interview me a different day. And so the program was super, super nice. And the program director replied herself and really couldn't have been nicer, was like, we're so excited to interview you. It felt like a very personal response and actually offered me an interview date on a Friday that they were interviewing their internal candidates, which was like the only day that they did interviews not on Saturday. Unfortunately, it was like the same day I had an interview scheduled for a different program. And so I then went back to that other program. I literally had a bacterial pneumonia at the time. This is all like very convoluted, but I didn't tell the other program about the interview conflict. I told them that I was very sick and that I would really like to reschedule that interview. And in like stark contrast to the Saturday interview program, this program said, if you feel like canceling your interview, cancel your interview. Like we're not accommodating you just because you're sick. Like I said I had pneumonia. I said I was like in bed, febrile with pneumonia. They were like, okay, you can cancel your interview if you want. So I then called my rabbi, who is lovely, and talked through the whole situation with him. He, at this point, at the time I was scheduling my interviews, I was actually sitting with a non-Jewish friend who grew up in like a very Orthodox neighborhood. And so was like very aware of like Shabbos goys and like things like that. And she was sitting with me and was kind of like trying to brainstorm for me how I could make a Shabbos interview work. And I think she even was the one who came up with the idea that like, if I wanted to, I could sit in her apartment and she would like control the computer. And if that was how it needed to be, that was how it needed to be. I should have said this was remote. All my interviews were remote. And so I talked to my rabbi, who at the end of the conversation was sort of like, I don't see any, he's like, you've asked them twice. I think I replied back to the initial program and said, I have another interview that won't let me move it. Is there any chance you have another day that's not a Saturday? And again, they said, we're really sorry. That's our only option. And so my rabbi was like, you've asked twice. He's like, look, do I love you sitting there on Zoom on Shabbos? No, but if you're going to have someone else do all of the computer work for you, this does feel like an extension of medical training, and sort of gave me like a heter to go ahead with it. And so I did interview on Shabbos on Zoom, which I wasn't super comfortable with, but it felt like kind of the best option for me at the time.
Thank you for sharing that. I remember you going through this live, and I feel like I live vicariously through this situation. And I'm sure more people will have questions, because this is definitely not the first application cycle where things like that happen. So it's great that we're here as a community to talk about it.
Yeah, I really leaned on the JOMA community chat, and it was like a lifesaver to have people just to like float ideas with and share perspectives.
No, I'm sure. And that's a hard situation to be in. So, I mean, and while we're interviewing at programs, right, and kind of meeting different programs, different residents, a common concern for many medical students is balancing family life and residency. How did you guys assess for family friendliness of a program? And for those of you with kids, were you open about having kids in your application process in your actual application? Did you volunteer the information on interviews? If you could comment on that a little bit.
I could talk a little bit about that. So during interview season, I happened to get engaged. So I was really excited and I was talking about it during my interviews. And that was actually a good point to see how the program director, whoever was interviewing, responded. And one of the ways that like you could see, like if they got really excited, like, oh, congratulations, and started asking questions, and then other residents would be like, oh my goodness, I also was in the same shoes as you. So it was nice to see which people responded with enthusiasm versus like, oh, I took that as a concern. We just got married in January, so no kids yet, but one of the easiest ways to assess like how family friendly a residency is to see the current resident pool. If people are married, do they have children? And there are many factors for that, but you want to see like across 4 years, if there are certain people having kids, then that means that the program is somewhat accommodating for that. So that would be my biggest recommendation to how to, gauge that. And Zahava, what do you think?
I feel like I was given a mix of advice about this topic, and this stretches back to when I was applying for med school, which isn't as relevant for this group, but I think I was sort of like, I was very visibly pregnant during my med school interviews. And so I had grappled with this question before. At that time, my interviews were in person and I didn't have a choice but to be 8 months pregnant at some of my interviews. And so I was at that point given the advice that it was better to acknowledge my pregnancy than to just like not say anything about it, because then it would sort of like open the conversation for people to like ask me anything, and I could sort of like reassure them about my support system and all of that. Whereas if I didn't bring it up, they would feel like it was illegal or uncomfortable to ask me a question about my visible pregnant belly, which is fair, and then maybe have concerns that I wasn't able to address. So that's like one thing that was 5 years ago at this point. But for this round for residency interviews, I was very torn up about this very question. For me, in the end, my kids and also the work that I've done at Mount Sinai to like build up our parental leave policy. I like started a group that helps sort of like help students navigate like family building during medical training. And that was sort of like my biggest passion project during medical school. And it felt like I couldn't not mention my kids when talking about it, and like my whole story and interest in obstetrics was so connected to my own like patient experience. And so I went back and forth. My advisor was actually really supportive of me writing my story as I felt like I should write it, and including my kids in my personal statement, because she felt like that was the best way to weed out programs that wouldn't be family friendly. I was scared to do that. I did it anyway, but my fear, which I'm sure like maybe is obvious, maybe isn't, but like my fear was that like, why, like I would rather be at a great program and like just be the I'd rather be the trailblazer with kids than not have the opportunity to interview at a great program and sort of like get a sense for myself after the interviews came out, rather than like not getting a chance to get the interview at all. I don't know how it impacted my chances. I know that I, on average got a little bit of a lower number of interviews than my peers from my medical school did, based on what my advisor told me. But like, it's so hard to know what that means or what to make of it. And I do think that the programs that did interview me seemed incredibly supportive, because I wrote about my kids. They felt comfortable, like sort of telling me about all of their residents who'd had children and all the ways that they support parents during residency, and giving me really nice feedback about my personal statement. And so I do think it helped in that regard to help me find like programs that were excited about having a mom. But I can't say for sure if like I didn't get the opportunity to interview somewhere because of that.
Yeah, that reminds me a lot back from like my own experience, and similar to you, when I was interviewing for medical school, I was very much postpartum, like a couple of days postpartum. And then when I was interviewing for residency, I was in person and very visibly pregnant. And it does bring up some interesting questions. And I think that more and more like parenthood in residency is in general in medical training is normalized. So kudos to you for being vulnerable and transparent about it. I took a similar approach and also mentioned it as like a one-liner in my personal statement. So fast forward, right, to the part in our application season when you are getting ready to submit your application. You've done the OAs, you've done the interviews, and now it's ready to kind of like make your rank list. Can someone walk us through signaling? And how did you approach signaling in the OBGYN match?
I can start with this. So the first thing, just for anyone who may not be aware of what signaling is, it's a relatively new thing that it has been introduced in the application cycle in the past few years, where basically you get, depending on what specialty it is, a certain number of signals that you basically it's a way of telling a program like, hi, I'm really interested in you. Like I may have, applied to 50 programs, but like these are the top whatever programs that I'm interested in. So for OBGYN, there are 18 signals. So it's 15 silver and 3 gold. And so those are basically like the tools that you have in order to like show a particular interest in a program. And I think the ideal way that like the governing bodies want it is that like basically like trying to reduce the number of places people apply to. Like they don't want every applicant applying to 70 programs because it's a hassle for the programs, it's a hassle for the applicants, it's expensive. I think ideally they would want you to only apply to the number of places that you signaled, and that'll be your like the places that you signal, and that's gonna be the pool. Obviously, like we're not gonna do that exclusively because 18 is not a lot. And especially if depending on what specialty you are, there's a certain number of interviews that you really want to get in order to feel comfortable going into the match. So I don't think that ideal will ever be reached, but it's kind of a step in that direction. So I think when it comes to choosing where you want to apply and where you want to signal is to really know yourself as a candidate. Like take an honest look at your competitiveness in your grades, your experiences, your research, et cetera, all those different aspects, and see how competitive you really are relative to your peers, relative to all the applicants in general. And like, secondly, you should like figure out what your narrative is as an applicant. Are you a super research heavy basic science sort of person? And then therefore, and like you have experiences to back that up. You have a ton of basic science research, you have, volunteering in certain things like that. And that's like your narrative. Or are you more of a community service person and you have research about community health? And then you try to find programs that align with your interests, because they're going to be looking for candidates that align with their mission and their goals. So those I think are important. You can figure those things out by talking to programs, looking like people in programs, talking to your mentors, looking on websites, looking at Instagrams, that you can kind of get a flavor for what the programs are, like what their vibe is. A way of figuring out your competitiveness is you can look at Texas Star, which has all the data from the applicants, their stats, their research things, whether they were AOA, all those sorts of things, and also talking to advisors to figure out what they think. The one caveat I'll give about advisors, which is something that I encountered during my interview season, was that it's really important to talk to advisors who are up to date about the current landscape of OBGYN application. OBGYN has gotten significantly more competitive over the more recent years. And if you're not talking to an advisor who is super up to date with how applications are going and like what the trends are, they may give you advice that is slightly overly optimistic. Like, for example, they might say, well, I applied with very similar grades from a similar school and I got into Harvard, for example. And it's like, okay, and maybe you are a Harvard-worthy candidate, but you have to be honest and look at the actual stats of more recent years and see if that still rings true. Like I personally was given advice that maybe was skewed more towards the optimistic, and that ultimately it worked out in the end. I'm very happy where I am. But like, I think it gave a slightly distorted picture, especially because I spoke to many people who had very similar advice. And it's because if you're not dealing with the day-to-day of applications, you don't necessarily know how things are going. One other thing before I get into the nitty-gritty of signaling is that you should also look at the historical data for your school's residency match for OBGYN. Look at where people have matched in the last 5-10 years. These data, like for us, at least it's available online. You can look it up. I'm sure your schools are either available or they're sent out. And I think it's really important to look that up because, well, of course, there's always people who go to new places. Anecdotally, I received, I think, 1 or 2 interviews from a place that don't currently have an Einstein student. Programs tend to take similar students. If they have an intern that they really like right now from your school, they're more likely to take another one from your school because, wow, this is a really good intern and we want more of them. And if they haven't taken somebody in the last 10 years, I mean, shoot your shot, especially if you have some sort of connection there. But I think it's good to be realistic about which places are your greatest chances of getting into different programs. And so signaling really is all about maximizing your chances of getting interviews. They're kind of tools that you can use to get as many interviews as possible so that you can feel safe. Also, basically, going into the signaling and like the breakup, you should signal wide range of programs. You should single reach programs, target program safety. These you get from stats, from, the Texas STAR data, and you should really assume that the only interviews you're going to get are from the places you signal. That's not necessarily the case. I did get a few interviews from places I didn't signal, but assume that you will not get any other interviews from any place you didn't signal, and think, intelligently about that. You're certainly not going to get all the interviews from places you signal. I mean, maybe you are, but I didn't. And I know most people don't. Think wisely about where you choose to send your signals so that you come into your interview season with a broad range of places. Because if you interview only at the top 10 places in the country, you have to be in their top 5 people they interview. So even if you have all these fabulous interviews, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to match. And there's one last point, which is that you should also, because signals are currency that you can use, you should make sure that you kind of gain the most bang for your buck in a way. Look at places that, like on the Residency Explorer, which basically shows the percentage of people who send a signal, what percentage of those people actually get an interview. So for example, if you interview at a place, like if you're looking at the Residency Explorer and it says 10% of people who signal this place get an interview, that's not so great. But if there's a place that the data says that 60% of people who signal get an interview, that's pretty good. That means that they care about signals and they are more interested in those people. And conversely, if there's a program that interviews, it's like 20% of people, 40% of people who don't signal them, then that maybe might not be the best place for you to signal, because you might have a pretty good chance of getting a interview without a signal. Talking to your advisors from the year before, who said oh yeah, 5 people got interviews there and they didn't signal them, it might not be the best place to use your signal. These are currencies that you can use to maximize your chances. And that way, sorry, a little bit of a sore throat. And that way you can just try to maximize your chances going into the match, so you have a good range of options and hopefully enough interviews that you feel comfortable going into the match.
Thank you for that. I feel like I just got a lesson on signaling because it definitely didn't exist in my time. We are going to segue on to questions for our current OBGYN residents. And by the way, this session is recorded, so if anybody missed any of this very helpful information and responses from recently matched applicants, you can always listen to the recording. Okay, so first question for our current OBGYN residents is something that many Jewish students in medicine, in medical school, recently matched, often think about. How do you manage Shabbat during OB residency? We know that OBGYN is demanding as it is, and how have you managed, especially with night shifts, weekend calls? Tova, if you want to kick it off.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm in the car, so I'm not looking directly at you, but I think it is definitely a transition, especially when you've never had anything in your life. I went to Stern, I went to Einstein. I always had off for Shabbos. It was never something I had experienced before, but I knew it would be very real in residency. I personally kind of took, in terms of figuring out what I could and couldn't do on Shabbos, I both spoke to Orthodox people in the field. I spoke a little bit to my rabbi. I honestly didn't speak that much to him. But mostly just spoke to people who had done it before me. And I found the place where I felt comfortable. I think everyone's going to be a little bit different, but I decided that when I'm at work and I'm serving patients, and that falls under pikuach nefesh. And so therefore, I can do the normal things that I would do at work, but I really try when I'm at work not to do anything additional. Oftentimes if I prep notes ahead of time, but I'm on a Saturday, then, and I know Shabbos will end that night, I typically won't prep my notes on Shabbat because I don't want to do anything extra. I don't buy anything. So if people are getting Starbucks, I'm not usually in on it unless someone's getting it for me. And I don't do any additional work research. If I have a minute to just sit down, I'll really just do nothing and try and lean into Shabbat. And then I do drive back and forth to work on Shabbat, but then the second I get home, everything is off, and then Shabbat is what it is. I will say also that I really try to, I've never been one to do this, but especially after October 7th, I really try to maximize the Shabbat time that I have at home. So I really try as much as I can to go to shul and to kind of connect to the Jewish community when I can, because you value it more when it's not a given. And I find that it really fills my cup. So I feel like I enjoy it even more than I did before residency, which is a little silver lining. I'll pass it along to Nicole or Sara.
Okay, I can go next. And I'll focus on a little bit of a different element. So there's definitely a lot in terms of halacha and Shabbos as an OBGYN resident, I don't think there is any Shomer Shabbos programs that exist. So I don't think that that's a realistic expectation to have if you're interested in pursuing this career, at least at the resident level. As an attending, I think that's obviously a different situation, and it's determined by like what kind of practice you join ultimately. But in terms of halacha, definitely like you'll find your own groove of what you feel comfortable. But I know that like I personally, for myself, and also have a lot of friends where we do something slightly different than our normal to like recognize that it's Shabbos on when you're working on Shabbos. So like for myself, I won't eat until I've like made Kiddush and Challah, which like there have been shifts where I have fasted. So like it happens, but it's like something that you're doing to like acknowledge for yourself that like, yes, I'm at work and yes, I'm doing a lot of what I normally do in my life, but like today is a different day and today is Shabbos, and I'm still celebrating Shabbos, even if I'm not like with my community. And you can also like bring your program in with you. Like I'm right now on night shift rotation that's 6 nights a week, and it includes Friday night. Like we do Friday night dinner together, like me and my other co-residents every week. And like they love it. They like know the different challah brands now. Like I don't drive on Shabbos. I take Ubers. And like at the end of the shift, they'll be like, oh, Sarah, hand me your phone. Like, let me order you your Uber. So like people are interested in our culture. Like it's for a lot of people not a culture they've ever been exposed to, and like they want to learn, they want to be a part of it too. And you can help make like what you care about and what's special to you a part of your program too.
I just want to say I love that.
Nicole, are you still on? Slash, do you have anything to add?
I am still on.
Hi, I
don't-
see you now.
Hi. I don't really have anything to add. I think that they really summed up like Shabbat in residency. It's really hard, but you make it what you want, what it can be for you. And I think the time that you do have at home becomes a lot more special.
Okay, so then kind of like piggybacking off of that, what about Chagim? Like, did you guys feel that there was enough flexibility in terms of scheduling ahead of time to ensure that you got off for Chag and Yom Tov?
I can start on this one. I would say at the end of the day, you will not have off for every Chag. And I think that is just something that you have to recognize, especially at the beginning of the year with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. You can't take off 3 weeks in a row. At least at our program, you get 1 week off. You're guaranteed Monday through Friday. Sometimes you can make it work that you can get 2 weeks off in a row, but you end up choosing which holiday you feel is most important for you to take off, whether that's for family reasons, whether that's for you personally. I know from my intern year, I was scared out of anything to be fasting while working, so I took off the week of Yom Kippur, which was a choice, but it was the choice that I felt like was the most important for me. This past year, I took off Rosh Hashanah so that I can be with my in-laws, which was really lovely. But at the end of the day, you have to pick and choose which holidays you want to be off completely for vacation. Now, in our program, we have wellness days that we can request on a case-by-case basis. So I used a wellness day for Tisha B'Av this past year, and I used a wellness day, I believe, for like 1 day of Sukkot, just so that I can be with my parents and my side of the family. But I know I do not have off on Pesach. I was not given that as a vacation. There's other people on my team that are on vacation that time, and I can't take a wellness day. So there are things that can be worked on, and I think next year will be a little different just with like who is our program director and everything in our specific program. I think we'll have a lot of an easier time getting our holidays, but it's me and Tova in the same class in a small program. Asnat's also joining. So there will be a lot of people that are kind of pining for the same holidays, which can make it a little difficult for us. But I think at the end of the day, even when I'm at work for the Chagim, I like make it my own. I worked on Hanukkah, the first night of Hanukkah, which happened to also be Christmas. I brought in my menorah. We pretended to light the candles together. It was a little wiener dog. It was really cute. For Purim, I was working. I dressed up with my attending. We had a couple's costume. It was adorable. Like, you just make it work, but it definitely takes away from family time at some points.
Also, she failed to mention that it was a completely like full-blown, like 7 feet tall blow-up inflatable costume that I did not have the pleasure of seeing in person because I'm no longer there, but it was well advertised on Facebook. I'm going to ask a little bit of a personal question, but it's definitely one that I got asked often. And so if someone feels comfortable addressing the mikvah as an OBGYN resident, I am sure our recently matched OBGYN residents and future applicants on the call are curious to know how one keeps this mitzvah in residency.
I can take this one. I definitely recommend recommend that you have a yoatzet or a rabbi that you feel comfortable asking your questions to, because they will definitely come up, not just in this area, but like everything you're doing as an OB. It's hard. You're busy. It's really hard to like find the time to do a badika, or to even remember to bring badika cloths to the hospital. Fun fact, if you don't remember, 4x4s are allowed to be used like b'diavad. It's a good pro tip that I learned, but it also will help. Like, you'll inevitably at some point in your career have to go to the mikveh when you're on nights, for example. So like having a yoatzet or a rabbi that can help facilitate that for you is very helpful. Like any mitzvah, it's still doable. It's just going to be a touch harder than what it had been previously because your schedule is a lot busier.
And so, like, of course, the mikvah is only one aspect of Jewish married life in residency. How have you managed marriage in general as a busy OBGYN resident working 80 hours a week? What advice do you have? This is obviously well beyond the means of a 2-minute answer on a webinar, but if somebody could sum it up.
You pick really good partners. Honestly, I think like Nicole and I talk about it all the time, how our husbands have like really stepped up. And I mean, I think you recognize your limitations. You recognize that sometimes you're not always like full of energy, and you're not necessarily 100% of the person that you want to be when you come home, let's say after like a 24-hour shift. But I think as much as possible, I try to bring my husband into like what my world is like, so that he really understands, and he makes an effort also to listen and to understand. I also think we started doing this thing that we saw on the internet where like you kind of tell the other person what percentage you're at. And this way, like, you kind of give what you can in the moments that you can. And then, of course, you always try to like maximize your time when you're not with them. And I think something that has been challenging, I've always been somebody who like feels like I can drop everything for a friend or like a family member when they call, when they need me. And in residency, like oftentimes you have to sort of pick and choose, and you have to also remind yourself that like your partner needs your time and needs your energy. But I think if you constantly keep it like top of mind that like this is a relationship that like needs to come first a lot of the time, I think that can be really helpful, and it's really appreciated on the other end, I think.
Tova, I'm giggling because me and Phil tried the same thing, and then we both just said like, I'm at -1, and he'd be like, well, I'm at -20. So it didn't really
you
work
guys
for
made
us.
the mistake of both going into medicine, and I can't help you with that.
Yes. So I will briefly talk about what it's like being married to another resident. My husband is a general surgery intern, so we both did not make the best choices when it came to work-life balance careers. The hospital becomes a place that is normal to spend time with your spouse. So like if I'm driving home from work and he's on nights, like I'll stop by and bring food to the hospital for him. And like he's come to like at the end after Shabbos like, to bring me pizza or something when I'm starving, when I'm working a 24. I've brought the kids to the hospital on Sundays to see him. Like it's kind of just about maximizing whatever time you do have, and just like breathing in and taking a step and knowing that like right now you're in a period of sacrifice. Like we sacrifice a lot for our patients and for the careers that we're going into. And like it does take a toll on relationships. And I think that that's something that needs to be acknowledged before starting residency, and needs to be something that like both partners in the relationship understand is going to be a reality of like what the next 4 years will look like. And it's just about like communicating through it. Like there will be hard times, there will be times when you want more out of your spouse than they can give, and vice versa. And like it's just about like being honest and talking and like taking a step when you can.
I couldn't echo more what the two of you have said. In terms of, partnerships and marriage and residency, I will say it does get better on the other side. One of the most common questions that we get asked is, how did you manage to have a family in residency? And so can some of you comment on kind of all things family building related, whether it be fertility planning, preservation, having children in residency? What has your experience been?
I can speak to a little bit of the family planning. I've talked on other Shoma events, but both my husband and I are CF carriers. We found out while we were dating. We kind of knew this going into marriage that we would be pursuing IVF for fertility reasons. We underwent all of that while I was in medical school the day before match, which was not a good day to do any of that, but that's a different story. And we kind of have these embryos there ready for me, and I have had some health things that have kind of put all of that on a little bit of a hold at this point, but this is definitely a discussion that I've had with like my co-residents, attendings that I feel really comfortable with, and even my program director, like when the time comes, what do you need from me? What can I do? Especially as someone that like literally needs to plan everything, like every part of this future pregnancy, family making, everything like truly needs to be planned up until like what time can I get the earliest appointment so I can go to work that day. And my program director has been really supportive. She said, whatever the earliest you know, the better. But if you need to start stuff and it might not work with your schedule, we'll make it work for you. And I think that support like kind of like gave me pause. I don't know what I was expecting. I don't know if I was expecting worse, but like it really made me feel a lot more comfortable with doing all of this during residency because it wasn't in my plans to hold off until after residency. So we'll kind of see how those things go. But that's been my experience so far, at least. It's been a road.
I can go next. So I had 2 kids in medical school, one in 2nd year and one in 4th year. And I'm not the only mom in my program, and I probably, like for most programs nowadays, I do think that it's a lot more common to have mothers or fathers in programs. I think the issue of like having kids or fertility planning, preservation, etc., is not just a conversation that we are having. It's if you like once you start residency, like you will discover everyone is having this conversation, whether it's like choosing to freeze their eggs, etc., etc. Like the age, it's like a different age division of who's in residency, and it's like much wider. And like this is a conversation and a topic on people's minds, not just our own. The big advice that I give to everyone with this, especially when you're in a situation like mine where both partners are in medicine, is before having kids, knowing what your support system is. And your support system could be family, you could be in a financial situation that your support system could be bought, like whatever it is. Just you have to have like a clear plan of how you're going to be supported in this, because it's not something you can do alone. If your partner's not in medicine, for example, maybe like then like them saying like I'm willing to take on the burden of being the primary parent, because there's a lot that comes with like having kids and a lot of unexpected things come up and you can't always be the one to be there. Like my first week of residency, one child had Coxsackie, the other child had an ear infection, neither child was in school, and like I was still a first week intern, like, and I couldn't be someone who wasn't like present at work as the first week intern. Thankfully have a lot of family support, and that's like our support system, but it's just about understanding what your resources are and like how you can lean on them. And ultimately I think similar to like we had other questions about like being a Jew in this, like being a Jew as an OB/GYN resident, and also like now with being a mom, I think we've been taught to like sort of like hide these parts of ourselves because like these are parts that we think are like only like issues in our community or whatever. Like I'm very vocal about my needs as a Jew and very vocal about my needs as a mom within the program, and I've only received positive feedback from it. Like you can ask for kosher food, like they can accommodate that. Like my son recently had surgery, and like I advocated that I needed to be at all of his appointments with the specialist and like have off for the surgery, etc. And like people will accommodate or at least like work with you if you're vocal about what you need, but also everything is within reason. Like I think like it's not like you have to work harder to prove yourself as like a hard worker as a mom. It's just like when you're at work, you're still like everyone else, like you have to work. But it's definitely very doable, and I think it only brings like a lot of joy to your life if it's something that you want. There are a lot of people having kids during residency. I think typically I don't often see people having kids in intern year, but like 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year is quite common for kids to be for people to be having kids. Most programs will arrange maternity leave. I think I've seen the minimum that people get is 6. The maximum amount of weeks I've seen people get is 8. That's a bit about it, I know, on like actual logistics. And also if anyone has like any questions specifically related to like having kids in residency or like making that happen when your partner's also in medicine, I'm very happy for people to like reach out to me privately to talk about it.
Thank you guys so much. We are going to stay on for several minutes after 7 p.m. We do have some questions in the chat box that we wanted to get to. We can start with a broad question. I'm curious to hear how the current residents stay motivated during residency. It seems so intense and exhausting.
It's a really good question. I would say some days are better than others, but I think that at the end of the day, as much as we're working and as many hours as we're putting in to, like, again, sacrifice our personal life for our patient care, like, I truly love what I'm doing. And when I'm at work, I really feel like I'm making a true difference, whether it's like medical education for students, whether it's with patients. And I just feel myself getting better. And I think that in and of itself is a motivator. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't hard days and days that I want to like throw something against a wall just from like pure frustration or like a bad patient outcome or whatever it might be. But focusing on the good and the things that you can do better for the next case, and the relationships that you can make and pave a way for yourself or for others, I think is really the thing that kind of holds me together. But then also coming home and having the support system, like family, friends, my cup in a different way. You make time for the things you want to make time for, and you learn to kind of push away the rest of the BS in your life. And I think that has also been a really nice thing. I've kind of have like a clean slate of like people that are truly there just to support me. And I feel like calm when I'm at home. I know who to reach out to. I know who my people are. And residency has like really brought me to that place.
Are there certain expectations for a certain amount of research done in medical school for OBGYN residency? And if so, when do you recommend starting research?
I can kind of answer that maybe, but I think that is becoming more of a competitive specialty, and therefore programs are expecting some type of research experience. Now, that doesn't mean you need like 7 or 8 different bylines, where you can't really actually speak to your research. I think you just truly have to be passionate about what's actually on your application. So you shouldn't be doing research for the sake of doing research, because I know I've had like 2 or 3 publications and a couple of presentations that I put on my application, and each and every time they would ask like a very nuanced question about one of the specific projects. And if you don't know it just because you were like the 4th person added just to be nice to you, that's not going to do you well at the end of the day. So if you are interested in research and you want that to be your thing, let it be your thing. Other activities that you are more interested in, like community engagement, like being involved in JOMA and making programming or doing any other community service, if you're interested in education in any other way, there are other things that you can pad your application with that doesn't just have to be research just for the sake of doing it.
And then in terms of communication etiquette, for those who recently matched OB residency, to what extent did you follow up with your top programs after the interview? Students often get mixed messages from programs about writing thank you emails, sending letters of intent. What was your approach? Did you send an explicit "you are my #1" email to your #1 program? Did a faculty mentor advocate on your behalf? If you can give some advice towards that end.
I can talk a little bit about that. I've just from talking to people at other med schools, I think this is a unique thing to our OB department at Mount Sinai. It's unique to the department itself. Like lots of friends in other departments did not have this experience. We have an advisor that is like extremely, extremely involved in all of our applications. And Ayelet, when you were talking about your advising and getting kind of like overly optimistic advice, I was laughing a little bit to myself because I felt like I had the opposite experience where we have this advisor who's like really trying to like make sure everyone's expectations are managed, and she's very risk averse. So I felt like I was like my like applications definitely leaned to a higher percentage of like target or safety programs versus like signaling gold to my like reach programs. So related to that, I think I would recommend, to whatever extent it's possible, to find someone I really do trust this person. She's very on top of like sort of has her finger on the pulse of like what's actually going on with the OB application cycle. If you can find someone like that, do it and take their advice seriously. She also like knows the programs really well and sort of like knows which programs respond well to letters and which don't. And so because I wanted to go to Einstein and she has a relationship with Einstein, she advised me to like write write a love letter. Like she had her own contact with the program director there too. Whereas there were other programs that I was considering ranking highly where I didn't have that same kind of like inside information about. It was, again, I got mixed signals from the program directors at the interview, whether they even wanted communication at all. And also my advisor and my network didn't have ties to those particular programs. And in the end, I went with both like a choice that I was really, really excited about, but also was like strategic in the sense that I knew that writing a number one letter of intent was going to give me more benefit than to like a program that might have been number 2 or number 3 on my list where I knew I wasn't going to get that feedback or that assurance from them. And so like using definitely trying to, and I could have gone in the other direction. Like, and I would respect someone who did like the other thing where you sort of just like throw caution a little bit more to the wind and like choose your number one program purely based on like kind of instinct or passion rather than like connections. But I think the kind of strategic way to go about it is to find a program where you also know that you have some sort of advocate who can connect you with the program director or someone else high up there.
I can just jump off of that. I actually had a very similar experience when it came to my like that process. I'll be honest with you, I think I can't even add anything because I basically did the exact same thing. The one thing I will add in terms of other communication issues is most programs will like at least my experience were like you can send thank you letters if you want or don't. That was kind of my experience. I always did. It feels like a cost thing to do. I felt there's no downside unless you like send it to the wrong person or have a typo or write these things. It's like, okay, so like don't be stupid and like, be diligent. Obviously, like these sort of things can work against you if you're not diligent and, attention to detail, because that's the kind of thing that programs would not be thrilled to see is you writing it to the wrong program, typos, etc. That was my experience. I always did. I don't know. It felt weird not to. I also know that plenty of people don't. And I don't think it works against you if you don't. It just but if you're doing it, make sure to do it right. The one other aspect of communication that people ask about is with regard to sending letters before interviews go out. Letters of interest, telling a program like, hey, like, the way that it works, you submit your application in September and then there's an interview release day where basically you're going to get almost all of your interviews on that one day. And then, ones will trickle out after that, but it's pretty much that one day. And so I was actually talking to Dr. Weinstein about this and she gave me some advice about, with regards to sending emails to programs that you're interested in. She's like, hey, I'm really excited about your program. This is why I think I'd be a good fit. This is what I like about your program. I hope you consider for candidacy, something like that. Schools of thought, you can either send them before the interview release or after. I personally chose to do after. So I basically sent 2 days after interview release day. I sent an email to all the places I had signaled that I hadn't heard back from, and a lot of places that I hadn't signaled also because I'm like, hey, it's an email, whatever. And there's one program that I really, really liked the interview at that I got a response to an email like within like half an hour, and that's one interview that I would not have had if I hadn't sent that email. And so I think that I would not underestimate the value of that. And certainly if you get put on a wait list for a program, certainly be like, hey, I'm really excited to be put on this wait list. I look forward to have the opportunity to interview. Like that email will never go awry unless you like have a typo. And I think that'll just show enthusiasm for a program, either before interviews are out, after interviews. That can never really go wrong unless they explicitly say, don't send emails. That is the only time which you should not. It might be on their website. They may say during interviews, if they say no emails, do not send an email. That's just not nice.
Thank you guys. If anyone's questions went unanswered, please reach out to us at womenshealth@joma.org. If someone can just throw that in the chat for everyone to see in the chat box. We are going to conclude tonight's webinar. To our amazing panelists, thank you so much for generously sharing your time, experiences, and insights with our attendees. Your expertise and thoughtful responses were invaluable, and we are so grateful for your contribution to making this event a success. And to our attendees, thank you for joining and for your engaging questions. We hope you found the discussion helpful and inspiring as you consider pursuing a career in OBGYN. This is the end of the webinar, but by no means the end of communication between us and you guys. Feel free to email us with any further questions that you may have, interest in JOMA, or anything else that went unanswered. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for attending a wonderful webinar.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now.
Perfect.